Hello everyone, Professor Kurzluck here. So it's been a little while since we did an update on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, so I just wanted to put together a video with some of the highlights of what's occurred over the last week. So we know that President Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. And after that meeting, there had been a lot of discussion and speculation that the two leaders would meet again, this time with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. So the days following that meeting, there was a ton of articles being written, chatter online about, okay, this meeting's going to happen, this meeting's going to happen. Vladimir Putin, Zelensky, Trump were going to come together. And it's been a few weeks now, and a lot of that discussion has seemingly gone by the wayside. If you're just reading the news, if you're following along with this conflict, you don't really hear a lot about, is this meeting going to happen? If you dig deeper, you can find some articles still talking about it, but it's not front and center like it was. You may have also saw that President Trump and Zelensky met, and it was a much better meeting than last time in the White House, which again, that created a lot of discussion. Oh, are the three countries going to meet together? Is this going to lead to some peace talks, a ceasefire, or a peace plan? And like I said, we've seen a lot of those talks kind of go by the wayside. And then over the past week, we have seen that the Russians and the Ukrainians continue to strike back and forth. There have been some small territorial exchanges. The Ukrainians have retaken a small Ukrainian town. The Russians continue in other parts of eastern Ukraine to slowly capture territory, quite slowly. The Institute for the Study of War updates their maps, and it shows just how slow that territorial gain is for the Russians. And like I said, the Ukrainians actually did retake a small town. So on the battlefield, we see that is the reality, that the fighting is continuing. The territorial expansion is slow by the Russians. It is extremely slow, and it is deadly. As we've talked about in a previous video, there's a lot of speculation and reputable accounts that think that the death count is continuing to be quite high on the Russian side. Sometimes hundreds and hundreds a day, thousands a week, 1,000 a week, thousands a week. So the battlefield losses have been quite high, even since the meeting in person between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and the meeting in person between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump. So on the battlefield, not that much has changed. There hasn't been a pause in the fighting. There hasn't been a cessation of hostilities. So when we think about what that means for peace talks, you've probably encountered some articles that said maybe these peace talks are failing, that maybe President Trump is having a difficult time bringing all sides. We know that when President Trump and President Putin met, Putin talked about, and we saw this again just yesterday and the day before, and then again today. Vladimir Putin is in China, meeting with the Chinese president, meeting with some other leaders, including the leader of India, Modi, where Putin's still talking about this idea of the root causes of the war, something that Putin talked about with Trump. Putin's now talking about in China, that if there's going to be a cessation of hostilities, there needs to be that there needs to be a resolution of these root causes. And that would mean NATO enlargement, which, listening to Putin, he talks about that maybe some of that NATO enlargement needs to be scaled back to where it was 20 years ago. So this idea of what Putin wants out of the conflict is not necessarily that realistic. Even if Ukraine would agree to not join NATO, which Zelensky has shown that he is willing to say, okay, we won't join NATO, but we need some security guarantees. Because from the Ukrainian perspective, if there's a ceasefire tomorrow, what guarantee is there that the Russians wouldn't just go home, rearm, re-prepare, and invade 3 years from now? So the Ukrainians are saying, if there is going to be this pause in fighting or a ceasefire, what guarantees do they have that the Russians won't just invade again? And some European countries kind of have the same idea that, okay, we need security guarantees as a continent to make sure that the Russians do not invade again. Because if you're on the eastern flank of Europe, you're concerned that the Russians will invade again and then maybe invade a NATO ally like Poland. So when Putin talks about the root causes, this is what he's getting at, this idea of NATO enlargement. But to Putin, it seems like he's frustrated that NATO enlargement has expanded since the 90s. Does that mean other countries would have to pull out of NATO? That doesn't seem like a reasonable demand that European countries would agree to. So we're kind of in this bit of a situation where we're stuck with the peace plan because it's just not realistic. Of course, the Ukrainians want to see an end to the fighting, but they don't want to give up a lot of territory. The Russians, led by Putin, don't seem that interested in a peace plan, that interested in stopping the fighting. And so when Putin talks about these root causes of the conflict, some of the bargains he's driving, some of the demands he's driving, simply cannot be met by European countries. So that's the big what's been happening since the meeting between Trump and Putin. The battlefield, they're still fighting. Putin is on the international stage, meeting with Xi, meeting with Modi. The leader of North Korea arrived in China today or last night. And that's something else that we're seeing going on, is possibly this realignment of India, who's kind of being pushed away from the U.S., being pushed away from close relations with the U.S. The Trump administration put 50% tariffs on Indian goods, arguing that it is because India is continuing to buy resources from Russia. So now we see these leaders meeting in China. Now, what impact will that have on peace talks? We're not really sure. It does seem like several of these countries are aligning themselves possibly against the U.S., which would make a U.S.-driven peace plan more difficult to achieve, but we'll see what happens over the next few days. Okay, thank you. I just wanted it had been a while since we did an update on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and a lot of it is the same. Still fighting in Ukraine, still small territorial increases by the Russians, a little bit of retaking of territory by the Ukrainians. We are seeing some Russian strikes deeper inside Ukraine, onto Kyiv, into Kyiv, buildings and civilians being killed in Kyiv, and then some Ukrainian strikes into Russia at infrastructure like fuel refineries, fuel depots. So really not much has changed since the meeting between Trump and Putin. Okay, thank you.